Hello, my name is Natalie Golden, and today I'll be talking about the endosymbiosis theory. This theory was discovered in the 1920s by Lynn Margulis. In the 1960s, Margulis wrote an article talking about the idea of chloroplasts and mitochondria evolving through endosymbiosis, but was declined by 14 publishers until one publisher published her work and endosymbiosis what became a new concept. Let's start by talking about a brief overview. The endosymbiosis theory is an evolutionary theory that helps describe and explain how eukaryotes evolved from prokaryotes. It mainly explains the origins of the first organelles, such as the mitochondria and chloroplasts, and how they formed in eukaryotic cells. Endosymbiosis starts as two completely independent cells. Then the larger of the two cells engulfs the smaller one, making one cell live in the other. These two cells now act as one cell with a symbiotic relationship and benefit from each other. This is thought to become the beginning of eukaryotic cells, or cells with organelles in them. Eukaryotic cells originated from a wide variety of prokaryotic cells, and because eukaryotic cells have organelles in them, these organelles had to evolve before eukaryotic cells could come into existence. But first, before we get into this, let's talk about the composition of atmosphere. Atmospheric oxygen built up from about 2.7 billion years ago to about 2.3 billion years ago, and then increased largely. It is thought this was caused by oxygen-producing organisms as they evolved. Oxygen can be a very reactive compound and can damage chemical bonds when in large quantities like this. The amount of oxygen in the atmosphere reached a toxic level and caused many prokaryotic groups to die off because of the condition of the atmosphere. Only some types of bacteria survived and had to adapt to the new atmosphere in order to survive. Now let's talk about the evolution of chloroplasts. Just like we said before, prokaryotic cells varied a lot. Some of these prokaryotic cells were anaerobic or had photosynthetic abilities. These prokaryotes were able to use the sun to produce high-energy molecules. This prokaryotic cell was engulfed by a much larger cell, but instead of being digested, it survived inside the cell and evolved into a chloroplast, and was one of the first organelles. This type of cell was also engulfed by a much larger cell, but it was also not digested, and it eventually evolved into what we now know as a mitochondria. So, you might be asking yourself, how do we know any of this is even true? Well, I have a lot of evidence supporting the theory. The first piece of evidence is that the mitochondria and chloroplasts both have their own set of DNA, separate from the DNA in the nucleus. This DNA is very similar to the DNA found in a prokaryotic bacteria cell. They are so similar that the DNA of the chloroplast and mitochondria could have evolved from the DNA of the bacteria cell. Both organelles also have ribosomes with RNA similar to the ribosomes in a bacteria cell. So as you can see here, the mitochondria and chloroplast DNA can be compared to the bacteria cell DNA. Another piece of evidence supporting the theory is that the chloroplast and mitochondria both have their own membrane, as well as the cell membrane of the bigger cell. This shows that the mitochondria and chloroplasts had to have entered the cell through the membrane, got entangled in the cell membrane, making their own membrane, and then the outer membrane closed on them, causing the organelles to be engulfed. So as you can see here, it starts as two cells, and when it went in, it must have gotten stuck in the membrane, making its own membrane and a larger membrane, which makes it a double membrane cell with two membranes. Another piece of evidence proving the endosymbiosis theory is that both the mitochondria, chloroplast, and bacteria cell are very similar in size. And they also divide in a very similar way. So if you look at them and they're all similar in size, that leads you to think that these two might have evolved from the original prokaryotic bacterial cell. So let's wrap up what we learned today. So in conclusion, the endosymbiosis theory is a theory that helps us understand how a eukaryotic cell could have evolved from a prokaryotic cell and how the first organelles got engulfed inside of the cell, like the mitochondria and the chloroplasts. I hope you learned something, and thank you for watching.